Arctic, a land of ice and shadows, where time seems to stand still, and the vastness of the frozen wilderness humbles even the most daring souls. The sea, capricious and merciless, ebbs and flows with a rhythm that is imperceptible to the human eye. In winter, it solidifies into an unbroken expanse of white, a realm where silence is not merely the absence of sound, but a tangible, almost living presence. The wind here does not merely blow. It pierces, it whispers, and sometimes it screams. In this frozen wilderness, survival is not guaranteed. Every decision, every step, every choice of direction can mean the difference between life and death. It was here, at the edge of the known world, that one of the most ambitious and tragic explorations in history was conceived, the expedition of Sir John Franklin. In 1845, two ships, the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, would sail into the Arctic in search of the elusive Northwest Passage, a route that promised to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, a path that had eluded explorers for centuries. To understand the enormity of this undertaking, we must first step back and consider the world Franklin inhabited, a world of imperial ambition, scientific curiosity, and relentless human courage. John Franklin was no ordinary man. Born in 1786 in Spilsby, Lincolnshire, England, he grew up in a world defined by the Navy, exploration, and the pursuit of knowledge. From an early age, he displayed a rare combination of intellect, resilience, and curiosity. He joined the Royal Navy at the age of 17, quickly distinguishing himself for his skill, discipline, and unwavering determination. His early career was marked by service in the Napoleonic Wars, but it was in exploration that Franklin would find his true calling. In 1818, Franklin embarked on his first Arctic journey, exploring the northern coastlines of Canada. This initial expedition was arduous. The Arctic, with its shifting ice, unpredictable weather, and sparse resources, tested every skill an explorer could possess. Franklin kept meticulous records, documenting not only the geography of the region, but also the daily challenges faced by his men. The constant threat of scurvy, the struggle to hunt and fish in barren landscapes, and the relentless cold that could seep into bones and spirit alike. It was during these early expeditions that Franklin honed the skills, strategies, and leadership qualities that would define his later, more ambitious ventures. By the 1820s, Franklin had become a respected figure in the field of Arctic exploration. His expeditions contributed significantly to the mapping of the Canadian Arctic coastline. But beyond the maps, Franklin brought attention to the human dimension of exploration, the endurance, ingenuity, and vulnerability of the men who faced these frozen frontiers. He wrote not only of the terrain, but of the courage and suffering of his crews, demonstrating a profound understanding of the human cost of discovery. Yet Franklin's ambitions were not purely scientific or exploratory. The British Empire, at the height of its power, was driven by commerce, prestige, and the desire to assert dominance over the unknown. Finding the Northwest Passage was a prize not only for navigation and trade, but for national honor. Franklin's expeditions, therefore, were imbued with a dual purpose: to expand human knowledge and to serve the imperial ambitions of Britain. This combination of personal dedication and national expectation would shape every decision he made during the fateful voyage of 1845. In the early 1840s, Franklin's reputation as an explorer was at its peak. He had returned from successful Arctic expeditions, published accounts that captivated both the public and scientific communities, and was recognized as a man of courage and intellect. Despite being in his late 50s, a time when most men of his era would have retired from such dangerous endeavors, Franklin accepted the command of what would become his final expedition. The stakes were higher than ever. The Northwest Passage had already claimed the lives of countless explorers. Ships had been crushed by ice, crews had perished from starvation and disease, and the Arctic had proven time and again that it was a realm that offered no mercy to the unprepared. Yet Franklin, confident in his experience and determination, set forth with a sense of purpose that was both admirable and tragic in retrospect. The HMS Erebus and HMS Terror were specially prepared for the journey. These ships, once sturdy vessels of the Royal Navy, were reinforced to withstand the crushing pressure of sea ice. They were equipped with the latest technology of the time: steam engines, iron plating, improved sails, and ample supplies of food and equipment. The provisions were meant to last several years, including canned goods, a relatively new innovation intended to provide nutrition in the harshest conditions. Franklin also carried scientific instruments, charts, and journals, intending not only to find the passage, but to contribute to the broader understanding of the Arctic environment. Departure from England was met with great anticipation. Crowds gathered at the docks, waving farewell to the men who would venture into the unknown. Letters of hope and encouragement were exchanged, and Franklin, ever the disciplined officer, gave his crew a final address, emphasizing duty, courage, and resilience. He was aware of the dangers that lay ahead, yet the allure of discovery, the chance to make history, outweighed the fear of what might befall them. The initial weeks of the voyage were relatively uneventful, as the ships made their way northward through familiar waters. Franklin maintained strict routines aboard the vessels, ensuring that his men remained disciplined, healthy, and prepared for the challenges ahead. Observations of ice conditions, wildlife, and weather were recorded meticulously, reflecting Franklin's dedication to both leadership and science. The Arctic, however, is a land of unpredictable extremes. Beneath its calm surface, dangers waited: hidden ice flows, sudden storms, and the ever-present risk of being trapped in the ice. As the ships approached the Canadian Arctic archipelago, the environment grew increasingly hostile. Icebergs loomed like silent sentinels, and temperatures dropped to extremes that tested the endurance of men and machinery alike. Despite careful planning, the conditions soon began to strain both the crew and the ships. Navigation through narrow channels required skill and precision. The ice shifted unpredictably, sometimes crushing smaller vessels entirely. Franklin's leadership was critical during these moments. His experience, decisiveness, and calm demeanor helped maintain morale even as anxiety and fear began to take hold. By late summer of 1845, the expedition had entered Lancaster Sound, a key gateway to the Northwest Passage. The passage promised a navigable route westward. But the ice was already forming in early autumn, signaling the onset of a long and perilous winter. Franklin decided to push further into uncharted territory, guided by maps that were often incomplete or inaccurate. Each mile forward was a mixture of hope and uncertainty, as the crew balanced the promise of discovery against the ever-present threat of the Arctic's deadly embrace. It is important to understand that Franklin's men were not untrained adventurers. They were seasoned sailors, officers, and specialists selected for their skill and resilience. They knew the risks and had prepared accordingly. Yet even the most capable and well-equipped crew could not fully anticipate the severity of the challenges they would face. The Arctic is not a forgiving environment. It demands respect, patience, and adaptability. In the case of Franklin's expedition, it demanded more than any man could have foreseen. In these early weeks of the voyage, Franklin's leadership style became evident. He was methodical, disciplined, and attentive to both the physical and psychological needs of his men. Meals, work schedules, and duties were organized to maintain order and prevent the erosion of morale. Scientific observations were encouraged, and officers were expected to contribute to both the navigational and exploratory goals of the mission. Franklin's journals from previous expeditions reveal a man deeply committed to the welfare of his crew, yet unwavering in his pursuit of discovery. As autumn progressed, the ice began to thicken, and the ships found themselves increasingly constrained by the frozen sea. The men encountered patches of moving ice, crushing floes, and treacherous leads that could open suddenly and unexpectedly. Each day demanded careful judgment, courage, and endurance. The Arctic's beauty, its pristine ice formations, the dancing auroras, and the stark, silent landscapes, contrasted sharply with its lethal potential. For Franklin and his crew, every sighting of the natural world was both inspiring and a reminder of their vulnerability. It was in this environment that the seeds of tragedy were sown. The Arctic winter would soon test the limits of human endurance, the reliability of technology, and the resilience of leadership. The decisions made in the first months of the voyage, though guided by experience and prudence, would have consequences far beyond what Franklin could imagine. Supplies, already stretched, would become critical. The ice, ever shifting and unpredictable, would imprison the ships. And the men, despite their training and resolve, would face conditions that no preparation could fully mitigate. The story of Franklin's final voyage is not merely one of loss. It is a narrative of ambition, courage, and the relentless human drive to explore the unknown. It is a tale of men confronting the extremes of nature, of leadership under unimaginable pressure, and of the fragile boundary between survival and disaster. It is also a story that would captivate the world, inspiring searches, legends, and ultimately, a profound reflection on the costs of exploration. The preparation for the 1845 expedition was unlike any Franklin had undertaken before. The British Admiralty, having observed the successes of his previous Arctic journeys, placed enormous trust in his judgment. The stakes were high. The Northwest Passage had been a tantalizing goal for centuries, sought by explorers whose stories ended in ice-bound ships and lost crews. Franklin knew that to succeed, meticulous planning was paramount. Every detail, from provisions to navigation instruments, had to be accounted for with precision. The HMS Erebus and HMS Terror were carefully retrofitted for the journey. Originally warships, both vessels were reinforced with additional hull planking and iron sheathing, designed to withstand the immense pressures of sea ice. Steam engines were installed, a cutting-edge technology at the time, intended to give the ships additional mobility when the winds failed. Franklin ensured that every inch of the ships was optimized for endurance. Stores of coal, wood, and supplies were carefully cataloged, while food provisions, including hundreds of cans of preserved meat and vegetables, were meticulously packed to minimize spoilage. Medical supplies, clothing, sledges, and hunting equipment were also loaded, reflecting the dual mission of survival and exploration. But technology and supplies alone could not guarantee success. The human element was equally critical. Franklin selected a crew of 129 men, composed of officers, sailors, engineers, and specialists, all experienced in Arctic service. Among them were men who had served in previous expeditions, familiar with the harsh realities of polar survival, and others whose skills were vital for navigation, mapping, and scientific observation. Discipline, resilience, and cooperation would be essential qualities, for the Arctic demanded not only endurance but the ability to work as a cohesive unit under extreme stress. Training and preparation extended beyond the ships themselves. Franklin emphasized routines that would maintain both physical health and morale during the long months ahead. Sailors were drilled in safety procedures, ice navigation, and emergency measures. Officers were briefed on the delicate balance of command and the importance of maintaining morale in isolated and confined conditions. Every man knew that once the ships entered the frozen Arctic, they would be isolated from the rest of the world for years, with survival depending on their skills, their judgment, and their loyalty to one another. In May 1845, the expedition departed from Greenhithe, England, amid great public interest. Crowds gathered to witness the departure of the two icebound vessels, with newspapers covering the journey and families waving farewell to their loved ones. Franklin, confident yet measured, addressed his crew one final time, emphasizing duty, perseverance, and the honor of their undertaking. He understood the risks, yet he also recognized the historic significance of their mission. The Northwest Passage represented more than a route through ice. It was a symbol of human ambition, curiosity, and the unyielding drive to explore the unknown. The early stages of the voyage proceeded smoothly. The ships navigated through familiar waters, rounding Scotland, skirting the Norwegian coast, and entering the Arctic Ocean. Observations were diligently recorded. Ice conditions, temperature readings, wildlife encounters, and the position of the ships relative to charts. Franklin maintained his disciplined leadership style, ensuring that routines were adhered to, tasks were completed efficiently, and the crew remained focused. The camaraderie among the men, forged through shared experience and mutual dependence, helped mitigate the anxiety that naturally accompanied such a hazardous journey. As they approached the Canadian Arctic archipelago, the environment became increasingly formidable. Icebergs, some towering hundreds of feet above the waterline, drifted silently in the frigid seas. The temperature dropped sharply, and the days grew shorter, foreshadowing the long polar night ahead. The ships maneuvered cautiously through narrow channels, seeking routes that would allow them to penetrate deeper into uncharted waters. Every decision carried weight, for a single miscalculation could trap the ships in ice, with dire consequences for the men aboard. Despite careful planning, the Arctic proved to be unpredictable. Shifting ice flows, sudden storms, and the constant threat of crushing ice challenged both men and machines. Franklin's experience was invaluable, yet even he could not control the whims of nature. The crews relied on both skill and instinct, using small boats and sledges to probe ice conditions, scout ahead, and prepare for potential emergencies. Hunting parties were organized to supplement provisions, and scientific observations continued, reflecting Franklin's dual commitment to exploration and knowledge. The expedition's progress was also shaped by the harsh realities of Arctic survival. Winter approached rapidly, and the ships had to find suitable locations for anchorage and potential overwintering. Ice conditions were closely monitored, and decisions were made based on both strategic considerations and the safety of the crew. The Arctic winter would demand endurance, ingenuity, and adaptation, as the men faced freezing temperatures, limited daylight, and the constant risk of scurvy and other ailments. Franklin's prior experience in similar conditions provided guidance, but the scale of this expedition presented unprecedented challenges. Morale was a constant concern. Isolation, monotony, and the harsh environment could erode the resolve of even the most seasoned sailor. Franklin implemented measures to maintain discipline and cohesion, organizing work schedules, scientific duties, and recreational activities. Officers were expected to set examples of composure and competence, while the men were encouraged to contribute to daily routines and scientific observations. Music, reading, and communal meals provided moments of respite, offering a semblance of normalcy amid the relentless Arctic landscape. The expedition's early successes were notable. Charts were updated with new observations, wildlife behavior was recorded, and the ships navigated through previously unexplored passages. Franklin's leadership fostered both confidence and trust, essential qualities as the voyage progressed into increasingly hazardous territory. Yet beneath these achievements lay the ever-present threat of isolation and entrapment. The Arctic was a land of extremes, and the men aboard the Erebus and Terror were acutely aware that a single season could determine their fate. By late summer of 1845, the expedition reached Lancaster Sound, a critical gateway to the Northwest Passage. The passage, while navigable in theory, was already beginning to close with the onset of early ice formation. Franklin faced a difficult choice: retreat to safer waters and risk the perception of failure, or push further into uncharted territory, seeking the passage before winter's grip became absolute. His decision, guided by experience, ambition, and confidence in his crew, would set the stage for the unfolding drama that history would remember as one of the most mysterious and tragic Arctic expeditions ever undertaken. As the summer of 1845 drew to a close, the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror pressed further into Lancaster Sound and beyond, navigating the labyrinthine channels of the Canadian Arctic archipelago. The landscape was a mixture of frozen waterways, jagged coastlines, and towering icebergs that loomed like silent, indifferent sentinels. For Franklin and his crew, every mile forward brought both anticipation and foreboding, as the specter of winter loomed on the horizon. By September, the first signs of serious ice formation became apparent. Narrow leads in the water began to close, and the ships were forced to maneuver cautiously to avoid being trapped prematurely. Franklin's experience in the Arctic provided him with confidence, yet even he understood that the environment here was unlike any previously encountered. The ice was not static. It moved, shifted, and pressed against the ships with tremendous force. One wrong calculation or a moment of misjudgment could mean disaster. Despite these challenges, the crew continued their work with remarkable discipline. Scientific observations, daily logs, and mapping efforts were carried out methodically, as if the normal rhythms of life could somehow counterbalance the growing threat of entrapment. Hunting parties ventured onto ice floes and islands to secure fresh meat, supplementing the provisions that, while abundant, were finite. These expeditions were perilous, with men exposed to frigid temperatures, unpredictable ice conditions, and sudden storms that could strike without warning. As autumn progressed, the ice grew thicker, and navigation became increasingly difficult. In mid-September, the ships finally became beset in the ice near King William Island, unable to move as the ice closed around them. This moment marked a turning point in the expedition. Though the ships were reinforced and well-provisioned, they were now effectively immobile, trapped in a harsh and unyielding environment. Franklin and his officers were forced to make critical decisions: how to maintain morale, how to ration supplies, and how to prepare for a winter that promised months of darkness, extreme cold, and isolation. Winter in the Arctic is unlike any winter in more temperate climates. Temperatures plunged well below freezing, and daylight dwindled until the sun disappeared entirely from the horizon for weeks at a time. The darkness was profound, and the cold relentless. Snow and ice accumulated on the decks and rigging, adding weight to the already burdened ships. Men were confined to cramped, insulated cabins below deck, with limited opportunities for exercise or fresh air. These conditions tested both physical endurance and mental resilience, as isolation and monotony became as dangerous as the cold itself. The crew faced not only environmental challenges, but also the creeping threat of disease. Scurvy, caused by a deficiency of vitamin C, was a constant concern on Arctic voyages. Franklin had included provisions such as lemon juice and preserved vegetables in an attempt to prevent it, but these measures were not always sufficient. Reports from earlier expeditions had documented the devastating effects of scurvy, which could weaken men, cause bleeding gums, and eventually lead to death. Franklin's vigilance in monitoring the health of his crew was essential, but the prolonged entrapment in ice would exacerbate these risks. Morale was a central concern for Franklin. He understood that maintaining order and discipline was critical to survival. Structured routines were established. Work duties, meal times, and scientific observations continued as scheduled, providing a sense of normalcy. Officers were expected to set an example, while informal gatherings, storytelling, and music were encouraged to lift spirits. Nevertheless, the psychological toll of isolation, the encroaching darkness, and the relentless cold was profound. Men began to feel the strain, some showing signs of depression, fatigue, or irritability. Franklin's leadership and personal example were now as vital as the ship's construction or the adequacy of supplies. As winter set in fully, the men encountered additional challenges. The ships, though reinforced, creaked and groaned under the immense pressure of surrounding ice. Hulls were stressed, timbers cracked, and even the strongest beams were strained. The threat of structural failure was constant, requiring constant vigilance. Crew members were tasked with clearing snow and ice, maintaining the integrity of the ships, and monitoring any emerging weaknesses. The work was exhausting, yet failure to act could result in catastrophic consequences. Food shortages soon became a concern. Though the ships were stocked for long-term survival, The unpredictability of the Arctic environment meant that rations had to be carefully managed. Fresh meat from hunting expeditions supplemented preserved provisions, but hunting itself was risky and increasingly difficult as the ice thickened and wildlife became scarce. The men were forced to adapt their diets, sometimes consuming unfamiliar or unpalatable foods, which could further challenge their physical health and morale. Reports from the early winter months indicate that the first signs of serious hardship were emerging. Some men experienced frostbite, others succumbed to scurvy or other ailments. Injuries and illnesses, which in temperate regions might have been minor, became life-threatening in the Arctic. Franklin's previous experience allowed him to respond with appropriate measures: isolation of the sick, careful attention to nutrition, and medical interventions where possible. Yet even the most competent leadership could not entirely mitigate the effects of prolonged exposure to such extreme conditions. As Christmas approached in 1845, the men faced nearly complete darkness, the Arctic night enveloping the ships. The cold was pervasive, seeping into every corner of the vessel. Franklin maintained his leadership, organizing celebrations, communal meals, and religious services in an attempt to sustain morale. Despite these efforts, the reality of their entrapment was undeniable. The ice had them completely immobilized, and the journey toward the Northwest Passage was now entirely suspended until the spring thaw. The psychological strain of this period cannot be overstated. Isolation, fear, and uncertainty gnawed at the crew. The Arctic, once a landscape of adventure and discovery, became a pressing and relentless threat. Franklin's personal journals from this period reveal a man both determined and deeply aware of the fragility of his situation. He recorded observations of the environment, the condition of the crew, and the strategies employed to maintain health and discipline. Every day was a test of endurance, leadership, and human resilience. The first signs of tragedy were subtle but unmistakable. Men grew thinner, their strength diminished by cold, hunger, and disease. Conflicts arose over minor disputes, a reflection of the immense psychological pressure. Yet through it all, Franklin and his officers continued to provide structure, encouragement, and guidance. The survival of the crew depended on a delicate balance of discipline, adaptation, and the unyielding will to endure. Despite these hardships, the expedition continued to document the Arctic environment. Franklin's men observed the behavior of seals, polar bears, and birds. They recorded ice conditions and weather patterns, contributing valuable scientific knowledge even under extreme duress. This commitment to observation and discovery was a testament to Franklin's character, a leader who, even in the face of adversity, remained committed to both the mission and the principles of exploration. By early 1846, it was clear that the ships would not break free from the ice without intervention. The Northwest Passage, the goal of the expedition, remained elusive. Franklin faced critical decisions: whether to remain with the ships, attempt overland travel, or take other measures to ensure survival. The men, already weakened and dispirited, looked to their commander for guidance. Every choice carried profound consequences, as the Arctic had now become an unyielding and unforgiving judge of human ambition and endurance. By the spring of 1846, nearly a year after leaving England, it had become painfully clear that the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror were trapped beyond any hope of free navigation. The ice, relentless and unyielding, had claimed the ships as permanent lodgers of the Arctic. Franklin and his officers faced an impossible dilemma: remain aboard the vessels, where shelter and supplies existed but mobility was impossible, or attempt an overland trek in search of safety, a journey fraught with near-certain peril. The decision was compounded by the deteriorating condition of the crew. Scurvy had begun to take its toll, weakening men physically and mentally. Frostbite, malnutrition, and the psychological strain of isolation had compounded the suffering. Some men had already succumbed to illness, their bodies buried in shallow graves on nearby ice or islands, their names carefully recorded in Franklin's meticulous logs. Despite the grim reality, the ethos of naval discipline persisted. Officers attempted to maintain order, distributing rations, organizing work duties, and continuing scientific observations whenever possible. Yet the creeping sense of doom was inescapable. By April, Franklin made the fateful decision to abandon the ships. The vessels, once symbols of naval engineering and human ingenuity, would remain as icy tombs, a testament to the power of the Arctic over even the most well-prepared expedition. The men dismantled equipment, salvaged what supplies they could carry, and prepared for the overland journey. The trek was intended to reach a known outpost or trading post of the Hudson's Bay Company, a lifeline that might offer rescue. But the distance was vast, the terrain unforgiving, and the crew's strength waning with each passing day. The overland march was catastrophic almost from the outset. Men, already weakened by scurvy and frostbite, struggled through deep snow, across treacherous ice and over jagged terrain. Temperatures often plunged below degrees C, and blizzards frequently reduced visibility to mere feet. Navigation was difficult. Compasses were unreliable near the magnetic north, and the Arctic landscape offered few landmarks. Franklin's officers attempted to maintain cohesion, but the physical and psychological toll was immense. Small groups became separated, exhaustion overtook even the most disciplined sailors, and the harsh reality of mortality became apparent. Evidence recovered decades later suggests that some men resorted to extreme measures for survival. Signs of starvation, cannibalism, and desperate attempts to find shelter paint a harrowing picture of human endurance pushed beyond all limits. Inuit accounts later corroborated sightings of dying or deceased men, some wearing tattered clothing or carrying belongings scavenged from the ships. These first-hand reports, though fragmented and filtered through cultural translation, provide crucial insights into the final months of the expedition. Franklin himself disappeared early in the overland march. His fate remains uncertain, though historical accounts suggest he died of a combination of exposure, disease, and malnutrition. Leadership passed to subordinate officers, who struggled valiantly to guide the remaining men. Yet the Arctic is impartial. Courage and discipline were insufficient defenses against starvation, frostbite, and disease. Men fell one by one, their bodies left behind as the surviving members pressed forward in a grim effort to reach safety. The journey revealed the limits of contemporary knowledge and technology. Despite careful preparation, reinforced ships, steam engines, and preserved provisions, the expedition succumbed to the environment. Maps and charts were incomplete or inaccurate, compasses failed under magnetic anomalies, and clothing and nutrition, though advanced for the time, could not prevent deterioration under such extreme conditions. Franklin's meticulous planning, his discipline, and his leadership were heroic, yet ultimately insufficient against the unyielding forces of the Arctic. The narrative of Franklin's overland march is pieced together from a combination of Inuit testimony, skeletal remains, and artifacts recovered from the ice decades later. These sources provide glimpses into the daily struggle, men attempting to hunt seals or caribou, dragging sledges loaded with supplies, huddling in makeshift shelters, and enduring blizzards that raged for days. The human cost is staggering. Bodies were found in clusters, sometimes near partially constructed shelters or cached supplies, suggesting moments of hope, only to succumb to exhaustion or disease shortly thereafter. Morale, once a key focus of Franklin's leadership, disintegrated under the relentless pressures of the environment. Men became desperate, occasionally turning on one another in disputes over food, shelter, or leadership decisions. The social cohesion that had sustained the crew through the initial months aboard the ships could not survive the extreme conditions of the overland march. The Arctic, once a domain of exploration and curiosity, had become a crucible that tested not only physical endurance but the very limits of human behavior. Despite the tragedy, The expedition left behind a remarkable legacy of exploration and scientific observation. Instruments, journals, and artifacts recovered from the ships and campsites provided invaluable insights into navigation, meteorology, and Arctic geography. Franklin's meticulous records of ice conditions, wildlife, and human experience offered future explorers critical information, contributing to a deeper understanding of one of the harshest environments on Earth. The human story, however, is dominated by loss, endurance, and the relentless power of nature over human ambition. The mystery of the Franklin expedition captivated the world almost immediately. When the ships failed to return, the Admiralty organized a series of searches that spanned years and continents. Expeditions led by figures such as Sir James Clark Ross, John Ray, and Francis Leopold McClintock scoured the Arctic, uncovering fragments of the story. Inuit accounts, often dismissed at first by European explorers, proved crucial in reconstructing the fate of the men. These narratives revealed not only the physical path of the survivors, but also the unimaginable suffering they endured. Artifacts recovered during subsequent searches, including remnants of clothing, tools, and personal items, paint a vivid picture of the expedition's final days. Skeletal remains, some bearing marks of extreme deprivation, confirmed reports of cannibalism as a measure of last resort. Each discovery reinforced the notion that the Arctic is an environment of uncompromising severity, capable of erasing even the most carefully prepared human ventures. The ships themselves, left frozen in ice for decades, became symbols of both ambition and hubris. In 1854, Francis Leopold McClintock discovered written records on King William Island, providing direct testimony of the expedition's final months. These documents detailed the abandonment of the ships, the overland march, and the gradual decline of the crew. The records confirmed that Franklin had died in June 1847, and that the remaining men had attempted to march southward in hopes of reaching safety. The notes are poignant, conveying both the practical measures taken and the psychological strain experienced by the survivors. They stand as one of the rare instances in polar exploration history where written evidence survives to illuminate a story otherwise lost to the ice. The Franklin expedition remains one of the most compelling tales of Arctic exploration. It is a story of courage, meticulous preparation, and human endurance confronted with the extreme limits of nature. It is also a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition untempered by environmental humility. For decades, the Arctic held the secret of Franklin's fate, challenging explorers, historians, and the public alike. The legacy of the expedition endures not only in the recovered artifacts and skeletal remains, but also in the lessons it imparts about leadership, preparation, and the indomitable, yet fragile, human spirit. The disappearance of Franklin and his crews triggered one of the largest and most persistent search efforts in Arctic history. The British Admiralty, alarmed by the absence of news, launched a series of expeditions beginning in 1848, just 3 years after Franklin set sail. Ships were dispatched to the Arctic from Britain and Canada, each tasked with scouring the frigid seas, charting unknown waterways, and if possible, locating the missing men or their vessels. The urgency was fueled not only by concern for Franklin's safety, but by national pride and the enduring allure of the Northwest Passage. Early searches faced the same unforgiving conditions that had doomed Franklin's expedition. Ice, storms, and the vastness of the territory rendered navigation and communication extremely difficult. Despite these obstacles, explorers pushed forward. Sir James Clark Ross, a seasoned Arctic veteran, led one of the initial missions, meticulously mapping coastlines and recording observations. While he found no trace of Franklin, Ross's expedition contributed valuable geographic knowledge, laying the foundation for future searches. Indigenous knowledge proved crucial. Inuit communities, who had long navigated and survived in the Arctic, provided accounts of white men traveling through the region, some of whom were sick, dying, or traveling in groups. Early European explorers were often skeptical of these reports, dismissing them as folklore or exaggeration. Yet over time, the credibility of Inuit testimony became undeniable, offering essential clues to the fate of the lost expedition. This partnership between European exploration and indigenous knowledge would later become a model for Arctic research, demonstrating that survival in such extreme environments depends on understanding the land and its people. In the 1850s, John Rae, a Scottish explorer and Hudson's Bay Company officer, followed up on Inuit accounts. Rae discovered artifacts and skeletal remains on King William Island that confirmed reports of starvation and death among the Franklin crew. He recorded harrowing details of men resorting to cannibalism, a revelation that shocked the Victorian public and fueled widespread debate. While some criticized the inclusion of cannibalism in accounts of the expedition, Rae's findings were scientifically significant, providing the first concrete evidence of the fate of Franklin's men. The search for Franklin continued well into the late 19th century, with expeditions led by figures such as Francis Leopold McClintock. McClintock's team located written records left by Franklin's party, detailing the abandonment of the ships and the overland march southward. These documents were invaluable, providing the only first-person account of the final months of the expedition. They described the death of Franklin in June 1847, the decision to leave the ships, and the gradual decline of the remaining crew. McClintock's expedition helped transform the Franklin narrative from rumor and speculation into a documented historical event, though many mysteries remained, including the exact locations of the ships and the ultimate fate of the last survivors. Despite decades of effort, the precise locations of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror remained elusive. Explorers combed the Arctic waters with sledges, boats, and rudimentary mapping tools, often enduring the same brutal conditions that had claimed Franklin. While occasional artifacts surfaced, the ships themselves were concealed by the shifting ice and treacherous channels. The story of the lost expedition became legendary, inspiring books, lectures, and continued fascination among historians, scientists, and the general public. The 20th century brought new technology and renewed efforts to locate the wrecks. Advances in sonar, underwater photography, and remote sensing expanded the possibilities for exploration beneath the Arctic waters. Governments and research institutions mounted systematic searches, combining historical knowledge with modern scientific methods. Yet the Arctic remained a formidable adversary. Ice conditions, extreme cold, and logistical challenges often thwarted attempts, and many missions returned empty-handed, their crews frustrated but undeterred. Finally, in the 21st century, a breakthrough occurred. In 2014, a team of Parks Canada archaeologists and researchers located the wreck of HMS Erebus in the waters south of King William Island. The discovery was the culmination of decades of research, combining historical records, Inuit testimony, and modern technology. The ship lay largely intact on the seabed, preserved by the cold Arctic waters. Artifacts recovered from the wreck, tools, personal items, and navigational instruments provided unprecedented insight into the final days of Franklin's expedition and the lives of his crew. 2 years later, in 2016, HMS Terror was discovered in Terror Bay, off the west coast of King William Island. Like its sister ship, it was remarkably well preserved, a frozen time capsule of mid-19th century naval engineering and Arctic exploration. The discoveries allowed researchers to piece together more of the expedition's story, revealing details of the ship's conditions, the challenges faced during entrapment, and evidence of the crew's efforts to survive. These findings brought closure to many unanswered questions, yet they also deepened the mystery, providing a tangible connection to a journey that had been lost for more than 170 years. The scientific study of the wrecks has been ongoing, with archaeologists carefully documenting the structures, cargo, and artifacts. The cold, low-oxygen waters of the Arctic have preserved delicate items, from clothing to navigation charts, offering a rare glimpse into the daily life aboard these icebound vessels. Researchers have examined modifications made to the ships, including reinforcement measures and equipment designed for survival in extreme conditions. The findings highlight the ingenuity, foresight, and resilience of Franklin and his crew, even in the face of overwhelming environmental challenges. In addition to the physical discoveries, the expedition's story has sparked broader reflection on the nature of exploration, leadership, and human endurance. Franklin's meticulous planning, discipline, and dedication exemplify the qualities of a determined leader. Yet his journey also serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of human knowledge in the face of nature's extremes. The balance between ambition and humility, preparation and adaptation, emerges as a central theme in the study of polar exploration, and Franklin's expedition remains a benchmark for understanding the complexities of survival in hostile environments. Public interest in the Franklin expedition continues to this day. Museums, documentaries, and research initiatives celebrate both the achievements and the tragedies of the voyage. Inuit communities, whose ancestors provided crucial knowledge of the region and its hazards, are increasingly recognized as central participants in reconstructing the expedition's history. The integration of oral histories, artifacts, and modern scientific analysis has transformed our understanding of the Arctic and the remarkable story of Franklin's lost expedition. The legacy of the Franklin expedition is multifaceted. It is a story of heroism and tragedy, of meticulous preparation and unforeseeable adversity. It is a narrative that bridges cultures, combining European exploration with indigenous knowledge. It is a testament to human curiosity, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of discovery, even when confronted with the most extreme conditions imaginable. Above all, it is a reminder of the Arctic's enduring power, a landscape that can preserve history while simultaneously erasing human presence, challenging explorers across generations to understand its secrets and respect its demands. In recent years, the continued exploration of the wrecks has revealed further insights. High-resolution sonar scans, underwater drones, and detailed archaeological studies have mapped the structures of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror with unprecedented precision. Artifacts recovered include personal items such as clothing, journals, navigational tools, and cooking utensils, each providing intimate glimpses into the lives of men who faced unimaginable hardship. The preservation of the ships allows historians and scientists to reconstruct the sequence of events leading to their entrapment, offering a tangible connection to a story long shrouded in ice and mystery. The Franklin expedition, once lost to time and Arctic ice, now serves as a powerful symbol of human exploration. It embodies both the triumphs of ambition and the limits imposed by nature. The discoveries of the 21st century provide closure in some respects, yet they also raise new questions. How did the crew adapt to conditions aboard the ships? What exact routes did they take during their overland march? How did individual decisions shape the survival or demise of the men? Each artifact and each observation from the wrecks adds another layer to this complex narrative, ensuring that the story of Franklin's lost expedition remains alive in both scholarship and public imagination. The journey of discovery continues. As researchers study the wrecks, analyze the recovered artifacts, and incorporate Inuit oral histories, new understanding emerges, not only of the expedition itself, but of the broader challenges of Arctic exploration. Franklin's voyage, though tragic, has provided invaluable lessons in leadership, preparation, and human endurance. It demonstrates the delicate interplay between ambition and environment, the consequences of misjudgment, and the extraordinary resilience of those who dared to confront the unknown. Ultimately, the story of Franklin's lost expedition endures because it is both a human tale and a cautionary epic. It is a narrative of men confronting extreme conditions, of leadership tested under relentless pressure, and of the enduring mystery of the Arctic itself. From the meticulous preparations in England to the icy tombs of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, the expedition captures the imagination and evokes profound reflection on the nature of exploration, survival, and the limits of human endeavor. As the men dragged themselves across the frozen terrain, every step became a monumental effort. The snow was often knee-deep, forcing them to lift their bodies against the weight of frozen clothing and sledges loaded with meager supplies. Each man's breath formed clouds that froze almost instantly in the Arctic air, coating beards and hair in a glittering frost. Their boots, though thick and layered, provided only minimal protection against the relentless cold. Blisters and frostbite became common, reducing the men's ability to move and work. Food, the lifeblood of endurance, became the most pressing concern. Caches of salted meat and preserved vegetables, carefully rationed aboard the ships, were now carried in small portions, insufficient for the energy required to traverse the frozen expanse. Hunting was increasingly difficult. Polar bears were scarce and dangerous, seals and birds were elusive, and caribou herds had migrated. Some men resorted to gnawing at leather boots, chewing frozen sinews, or consuming remnants of sled dogs. The psychological impact of starvation compounded the physical toll, pushing men to acts they might have considered unthinkable weeks earlier. The psychological strain cannot be understated. Every man on the march was acutely aware of mortality, the failure of comrades, the weight of the frozen landscape, and the unyielding darkness of the polar night. Isolation gnawed at the mind, and paranoia sometimes set in. Officers attempted to maintain order, but as strength diminished, arguments and small skirmishes arose, particularly over rations and leadership decisions. The very cohesion that had held the crew together on the ships began to fray. Franklin, whose meticulous leadership had carried the expedition this far, was no longer present. His death left a vacuum that could not easily be filled. Subordinate officers were forced to make decisions with incomplete knowledge of the terrain and the resources remaining. They improvised shelters using sails, timbers, and ice, attempting to create spaces that offered minimal warmth and protection from the wind. Survival depended on ingenuity, yet even the best-planned improvisations were often insufficient against Arctic extremes. Meanwhile, the environment itself was an ever-present adversary. Temperatures frequently dropped below degrees C, with winds slicing across the ice at alarming speeds. Whiteouts obscured visibility, making navigation perilous and disorienting. Men became separated from one another in blinding blizzards, sometimes for hours, sometimes never to reunite. Ice fractures and hidden crevasses claimed limbs and lives alike. Even rivers and streams, frozen solid, could hide treacherous cracks that swallowed men or sledges whole. The Arctic demanded respect at every turn. It gave nothing freely. Amidst this struggle, moments of human ingenuity and adaptation emerged. Some men experimented with makeshift snowshoes to reduce fatigue, while others constructed simple sleds or improvisational pulleys to transport supplies across uneven ice. Hunting techniques evolved as they adapted to the behavior of seals, birds, and occasional Arctic foxes. Journals recovered from the expedition hint at these small victories, strategies to conserve calories, manage frostbite, or maintain morale through storytelling, singing, or reading aloud. These details remind us that even in desperation, the human spirit seeks creativity and hope. The Inuit, whose knowledge of the land had been crucial to early searchers, often observed the expedition at a distance. Later accounts revealed that they witnessed groups of men struggling through the ice, wearing tattered clothing and carrying small packs, sometimes attempting to communicate but hindered by language barriers. The Inuit descriptions, recorded decades later, are haunting. They speak of men who looked like shadows, faces frozen, eyes hollow, moving in small, desperate groups toward the south. These observations are among the most vivid contemporary testimonies of the expedition's tragic overland journey. Gradually, the survivors' numbers dwindled. Men fell from exhaustion, disease, and exposure, leaving only small clusters struggling to continue. As they moved, they left behind the belongings, tools, and even personal effects they had carried from the ships. Every item abandoned was a small concession to survival, yet even this was often insufficient. Stories recovered from skeletal evidence show that men attempted to preserve supplies in caches, hoping to return for them, a hope never realized. The march also highlighted the limitations of contemporary navigation and understanding of Arctic geography. Maps from the 1840s were often inaccurate. Channels, islands, and waterways were poorly charted. Magnetic compasses, essential tools for navigation, were unreliable near the poles. The men could not rely on celestial navigation during the months of darkness, nor could they safely travel across unknown ice formations without risking sudden entrapment or disaster. Every decision was a gamble, and the Arctic environment dictated the pace, direction, and survival of the expedition. As the weeks turned into months, desperation intensified. Cannibalism, though horrifying to Victorian sensibilities, became a grim reality in some parties. Evidence from skeletal remains confirms that extreme measures were taken as a last resort for survival. Contemporary records, later corroborated by Inuit accounts, describe men consuming the flesh of fallen comrades, a practice done not from malice but sheer necessity. These acts underscore the absolute severity of the conditions and the lengths to which human beings can be pushed in extremis. Despite the tragedy, the expedition continued to document its environment whenever possible. Observations of ice behavior, wildlife patterns, and weather conditions were recorded in the few journals and notes that survived. These fragments would later prove invaluable, providing researchers and historians with insight into the Arctic landscape and the extraordinary challenges faced by the men. The meticulous attention to detail, even in the most desperate circumstances, is a testament to the discipline and commitment instilled by Franklin's leadership. The overland journey also left behind physical markers of human endeavor. Tools, sled fragments, makeshift shelters, and other artifacts were scattered across the ice and islands. These remnants, eventually recovered by searchers decades later, offer tangible evidence of the struggles endured. They speak of the effort required to drag sledges over frozen ground, the ingenuity used to construct temporary shelters, and the human desperation that permeated the expedition's final months. Each artifact tells a story of resilience, suffering, and the confrontation between human ambition and natural limits. The pace of the overland march was slow and punishing. Men could cover only a few miles per day, if that. Frostbite caused fingers and toes to be lost, reducing dexterity needed for tasks like handling sledges or weapons for hunting. Snow blindness, caused by reflection from the ice and snow, temporarily incapacitated men, adding further danger. Hypothermia was a constant threat, and exposure to storms could result in death within hours. Even the smallest errors, misjudging the stability of ice, miscalculating ration distributions, or underestimating weather severity, had fatal consequences. Life aboard the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror during the first winter of entrapment was a mixture of discipline, monotony, and constant vigilance. Franklin, ever the meticulous commander, understood that the psychological well-being of the crew was as critical as their physical health. Daily routines were established with military precision. Officers rose early to inspect the decks, check equipment, and review rations, while sailors followed assigned duties, maintaining the rigging, clearing ice from the decks, and performing regular drills designed to keep muscles from atrophying in the confined spaces below. Meals, though monotonous, were carefully scheduled. Preserved meats, salted vegetables, and canned provisions formed the bulk of the diet. Occasionally, hunting parties returned with fresh seal, bird, or fish, providing brief moments of relief and the psychological boost of a hot meal. Franklin insisted that even during periods of limited activity, the crew engage in communal meals, encouraging conversation, camaraderie, and the sharing of stories. These gatherings were not mere social niceties. They were carefully designed interventions to maintain morale and prevent the creeping despair that isolation so easily brought. Scientific observation was another cornerstone of life aboard the ships. Franklin's background in exploration and mapping meant that his crew was constantly engaged in documenting the Arctic environment. Temperature readings were recorded multiple times a day, ice conditions were logged, and wildlife sightings meticulously noted. Officers and specialists took measurements of barometric pressure, tracked the movement of sea ice, and observed the behavior of seals, walruses, and Arctic birds. These activities were not simply for curiosity. They served to structure the crew's days, occupy restless minds, and preserve a sense of purpose in the face of confinement. Interpersonal dynamics played a critical role in maintaining order. Men lived in close quarters, often sharing cabins with limited ventilation, warmth, and privacy. Officers had to balance discipline with empathy, ensuring that men remained cooperative and motivated. Franklin's leadership style emphasized respect, fairness, and clear communication. He personally intervened in disputes, mediated conflicts, and ensured that duties were distributed equitably. Yet even the most careful management could not fully mitigate the mental strain of confinement, cold, and the uncertainty of their situation. Physical exercise, though limited, was encouraged to prevent the decline of strength and stamina. Sailors performed calisthenics, moved heavy objects, and engaged in small tasks designed to mimic the exertion required for survival outside. Franklin understood that idle men in an Arctic winter would quickly deteriorate in both health and spirit. Discipline, therefore, extended beyond maintaining order. It included sustaining physical resilience against the cold, the ice, and the months of darkness ahead. Despite these precautions, the environment was relentless. Winter brought long nights, sometimes with weeks of continuous darkness. Ice pressed against the ships, causing timbers to groan and decks to warp. Snow accumulated in drifts that blocked pathways and forced the crew to continuously shovel and clear passages. Storms could rage for days, battering the hulls and whipping up snow that penetrated even the thickest insulation. These conditions tested both the ingenuity of the crew and the limits of their supplies. Franklin's preparations were thorough, yet the Arctic consistently revealed unforeseen challenges. Illness began to emerge as a pressing concern. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, was the most feared affliction. Franklin had stocked lemon juice, preserved vegetables, and other remedies, but prolonged consumption of preserved rations could not fully prevent the disease. Early signs, weakness, gum swelling, fatigue, appeared in some sailors, requiring careful monitoring and immediate intervention. The ship's surgeon worked tirelessly, administering treatments, isolating affected men, and advising on diet adjustments. Even minor injuries became hazardous, as infection could take hold in the cold, confined environment, compounding the threat to life. The monotony of winter life was punctuated by attempts at entertainment and distraction. Men wrote letters, read aloud from books, played simple games, and sang songs to keep spirits alive. Music, in particular, played a crucial role. A sailor strumming a fiddle or a small group singing together could momentarily lift the oppressive weight of Arctic confinement. Franklin recognized these efforts as essential for morale, understanding that the mind could succumb to despair faster than the body could weaken. Beyond routine, tension occasionally arose between men and officers. The stress of entrapment amplified small disagreements into significant disputes. Over rations, division of work, and the allocation of responsibilities, minor disagreements sometimes flared into arguments. Franklin's role as mediator was essential. His presence, authority, and even temperament were central in preventing these disputes from escalating into broader breakdowns of order. He also encouraged accountability and camaraderie, ensuring that men remained focused on survival and the eventual continuation of the journey. Weather monitoring and ice observation occupied the officers' attention constantly. Ice flows shifted unpredictably, sometimes trapping ships more securely or threatening to crush the hull. Franklin and his navigators meticulously recorded every change, plotting courses and contingency plans in journals. They examined leads, narrow openings in the ice that could provide temporary movement, and carefully tested the thickness of surrounding ice before attempting even minor maneuvers. The slightest miscalculation could endanger the entire crew, a reality that instilled both vigilance and a sense of dread. As winter deepened, it became clear that the Arctic would not yield easily to human ambition. Despite the preparations, discipline, and ingenuity displayed aboard the ships, Franklin and his crew faced an unrelenting enemy: ice, cold, and darkness. Small victories, successful hunts, effective clearing of ice, minor repairs, were celebrated quietly, while failures could result in serious injury or permanent damage to supplies. These cycles of challenge and partial triumph shaped the psychological rhythms aboard the ships, instilling both resilience and an awareness of vulnerability. Beyond the immediate challenges, Franklin encouraged reflection and intellectual engagement. Men were tasked with studying charts, observing natural phenomena, and maintaining journals. These activities provided mental stimulation and a sense of purpose, essential in an environment where hope was fragile. Franklin himself documented every detail, from daily routines to observations of celestial events, ice movements, and animal behavior. These records, preserved in fragments recovered decades later, form the backbone of modern understanding of the expedition's first months and reveal the extraordinary discipline required to maintain both mental and physical health. By the time spring approached in 1846, the cracks in the crew's endurance became evident. While Franklin had successfully maintained cohesion, the limitations of supplies, environment, and human physiology were becoming unavoidable. Rations were carefully measured, yet caloric intake could not match the energy expended in clearing ice, hunting, or performing strenuous tasks. Scurvy and frostbite began to weaken men visibly, and minor illnesses spread more easily in the confined quarters. It was at this moment that Franklin made the critical assessment that remaining with the ships might no longer ensure survival. The overland march would begin, marking the transition from structured life aboard the vessels to the uncertain, desperate struggle across the frozen landscape. The Arctic environment in which Franklin and his crew were trapped was as beautiful as it was merciless. From the deck of the Erebus and Terror, men could observe ice formations stretching to the horizon, vast fields of hummocked ice rising like frozen mountains, interspersed with narrow channels of dark, frigid water. The ice was not static. It shifted with currents and wind, sometimes opening temporary leads, at other times closing passages entirely. These movements were unpredictable, requiring constant vigilance. Even small changes in wind or temperature could trap a ship, crush timbers, or force men to abandon carefully planned routes. Seasonal cycles profoundly shaped daily life. In summer, the Arctic sun provided nearly continuous daylight, allowing for extended hunting, mapping, and maintenance of the ships. Yet summer also brought challenges. Melting ice could open dangerous channels, exposing weak ice to sudden shifts, while fog and sudden storms complicated navigation. Winter, by contrast, imposed months of darkness, with the sun disappearing entirely for long stretches. Temperatures routinely plummeted below degrees C, and wind chill effects made exposure lethal. The frozen landscape offered few landmarks, and crevasses or hidden leads in the ice posed constant threats. This extreme environment dictated the rhythm of life, shaping the crew's movements, routines, and survival strategies. The crew themselves were a study in human diversity and endurance. Among the 129 men were seasoned officers who had participated in previous Arctic expeditions, sailors accustomed to extreme conditions, and specialists whose knowledge of engineering, navigation, and science was essential. Lieutenant John Irving, for instance, was responsible for managing engineering tasks on the steam engines of the ships, a critical role given that mobility could hinge on their proper functioning. Other officers, such as Lieutenant Francis Crozier, brought decades of Arctic experience, having navigated treacherous ice and unpredictable weather on previous voyages. Among the crew, ordinary sailors displayed remarkable resilience. Many came from humble backgrounds, accustomed to physical labor, harsh weather, and long periods at sea. Their expertise in seamanship, combined with discipline instilled by years of naval service, allowed them to manage the ship's rigging, sails, and deck equipment even under extreme strain. These men were the backbone of the expedition, performing grueling physical work that demanded both strength and endurance. Daily tasks, shoveling snow, hauling coal for the engines, repairing damaged timbers, were undertaken in sub-zero temperatures, with constant awareness of the dangers posed by frostbite, falling ice, or sudden storms. Medical personnel were vital to survival, though even their skills were taxed by the extreme conditions. Surgeon John Ray and his assistants monitored the crew for signs of scurvy, frostbite, and other ailments. Their work involved not only treating illness but advising on nutrition, rationing, and preventative measures. Despite their expertise, however, the Arctic environment imposed limits on their effectiveness. Scurvy and other diseases gradually weakened men, their recovery slowed by the lack of fresh food and constant exposure to cold. The surgeon's journals, recovered decades later, reveal a painstaking effort to mitigate these effects, highlighting both the dedication of medical officers and the relentless challenges posed by the environment. Scientific and exploratory work remained central to the expedition's mission. Franklin had a personal commitment to observation, charting, and recording data. Officers and specialists maintained detailed journals of ice conditions, weather patterns, wildlife activity, and celestial observations. Barometers, thermometers, sextants, and chronometers were used daily, providing not only navigational guidance but a meticulous record for posterity. These records reflected the dual purpose of the expedition. While survival was paramount, the collection of scientific knowledge and geographic data remained a constant objective. Even in the face of suffering and isolation, men engaged with curiosity and professionalism, leaving a legacy of data that would inform Arctic exploration for decades. Interpersonal relationships were critical in maintaining order and morale. Living in close quarters, the men relied on each other for survival, companionship, and emotional support. Officers were expected to maintain authority while fostering cooperation, resolving disputes, and supporting men through illness or exhaustion. The bonds formed under such extreme circumstances were intense, as comradeship was a lifeline. Yet tension inevitably arose, and minor disagreements over duties, rations, or leadership occasionally escalated. Franklin's leadership style emphasized fairness and discipline, providing a structured environment in which men could rely on one another despite the psychological pressures of Arctic confinement. Daily life was punctuated by rituals that balanced survival, duty, and psychological endurance. Meals were communal and structured, tasks were assigned with precision, and recreational activities were encouraged to stave off despair. Reading aloud, storytelling, and music offered respite from monotony and darkness. These seemingly minor elements played an outsized role in maintaining cohesion. Franklin understood that the mind could fail long before the body, and he carefully curated routines that reinforced morale, discipline, and shared purpose. The broader historical context added layers of pressure and significance to the expedition. By 1845, the Northwest Passage was a goal pursued for centuries. A route promising not only shorter maritime travel between Europe and Asia, but also prestige and scientific acclaim. Previous explorers had vanished, leaving behind cautionary tales of entrapment, starvation, and death. Franklin's journey was therefore both a personal mission and a national endeavor. The pressure to succeed and to survive was immense, influencing decision-making and intensifying the stakes of each maneuver, each rationing choice, and each day spent in frozen isolation. The psychological dimension of Arctic exploration cannot be understated. Men faced extended darkness, extreme cold, limited mobility, and the constant threat of death. Isolation exacerbated fears and anxiety, while the monotony of routine could become oppressive. Franklin's careful structuring of life aboard the ships, his emphasis on purpose and duty, and his personal example of resilience helped mitigate these pressures, but only to a degree. Diaries from crew members indicate recurring themes of fatigue, longing for home, and reflection on mortality. These writings illuminate the human experience behind the expedition, offering insight into the daily courage required to endure conditions that modern adventurers can scarcely imagine. Meteorological phenomena fascinated and challenged the crew simultaneously. Aurora borealis often illuminated the Arctic sky in brilliant colors, a spectacle of light against an otherwise dark and frozen landscape. Snowstorms could strike without warning, dropping temperatures dramatically and covering the ships and surrounding ice in thick layers. Frost accumulated on decks, rigging, and even inside cabins, demanding continuous attention. Franklin's crew meticulously recorded these events, providing not only a scientific record but also a psychological anchor. Observing and documenting the environment offered a semblance of control amidst chaos. The ships themselves were marvels of engineering, adapted for extreme conditions. Thick hulls reinforced with iron and additional planking were designed to resist ice pressure. Steam engines offered supplemental mobility when wind failed. Every element from coal storage to timber supports was optimized for endurance. Yet, as winter wore on, the limits of these designs became apparent. Ice pressure caused stress fractures, timbers groaned, and decks warped. Regular maintenance consumed time and energy, adding to the workload of already fatigued men. The interplay between human effort and mechanical ingenuity was a constant tension, highlighting the delicate balance required for survival in such an unforgiving environment. By the late winter of 1845–1846, signs of strain were undeniable. Men exhibited fatigue, scurvy cases increased, and the psychological pressure of entrapment intensified. Franklin and his officers recognized the limits of remaining aboard the ships and began considering contingency plans. Discussions about potential routes for overland travel, cache locations for supplies, and survival strategies became more urgent. The transition from disciplined life aboard the ships to the desperate overland march would mark a profound shift, one that would test the limits of human endurance, leadership, and cohesion. The disappearance of Franklin and his men in 1845 triggered one of the most extensive search efforts in maritime history. The British Admiralty, anxious to understand the fate of their flagship expedition, launched multiple missions almost immediately. Ships were dispatched from ports in Britain and Canada, often equipped with the latest navigational instruments, sledges, and winter provisions. These expeditions faced many of the same hazards that had beset Franklin: shifting ice, sudden storms, extreme cold, and the vast, unmapped expanses of the Arctic archipelago. Early search expeditions were led by experienced Arctic explorers, often veterans of previous voyages. Sir James Clark Ross, a celebrated navigator and polar explorer, undertook one of the first missions. Ross charted coastlines, studied ice conditions, and sought any evidence of Franklin's route. Despite his efforts, he found no trace of the missing ships or crew. Still, his meticulous mapping of northern passages and observation of the ice contributed to the growing body of Arctic knowledge, laying the groundwork for future searches and highlighting the vastness and danger of the territory Franklin had traversed. A turning point in understanding Franklin's fate came with the accounts of the Inuit people, who had long lived in and navigated the Arctic. Early European explorers often dismissed these stories as folklore, but gradually, Inuit testimony became central to reconstructing the expedition's events. Inuit witnesses described encountering groups of white men, some sick, some injured, moving in small, desperate parties across the ice and islands. They observed men scavenging, hunting, or attempting to survive in makeshift shelters. While fragmented and sometimes ambiguous, these accounts were invaluable, providing hints of routes taken and the extreme hardships endured. John Ray, a Scottish explorer and Hudson's Bay Company officer, undertook one of the most significant investigations based on Inuit testimony. In 1854, he discovered skeletal remains and artifacts on King William Island that corroborated reports of starvation, scurvy, and extreme deprivation. Ray documented evidence of cannibalism, a revelation that shocked Victorian society and challenged prevailing notions of civility and morality. The Royal Navy initially resisted accepting this, yet the evidence was irrefutable. Men had resorted to consuming the flesh of deceased comrades, a desperate measure for survival rather than an act of violence. Ray's findings were among the first to provide concrete, tangible evidence of Franklin's fate, though they also stirred controversy and discomfort in Britain. In the late 1850s and 1860s, Sir Francis Leopold McClintock led further expeditions to recover additional information. McClintock's team discovered written records left by Franklin's officers, detailing the abandonment of the ships and the overland march southward. These documents confirmed that Franklin himself had died in June 1847 and described the gradual decline of the remaining crew. McClintock's recovery of these records was a milestone, offering the first definitive written testimony of the expedition's final months. It was a sobering confirmation of the ordeal, revealing the human determination to maintain documentation even in the face of death and deprivation. Subsequent searches, such as those led by Leopold McClintock and other Royal Navy expeditions, meticulously combed the Arctic for artifacts, skeletal remains, and signs of habitation. Each discovery was pieced together like a puzzle, gradually revealing the route and suffering of the crew. Relics such as sledges, clothing, and cooking utensils were catalogued, offering a glimpse into the daily lives of men struggling for survival. These expeditions, though often hindered by extreme weather and difficult ice conditions, were crucial in transforming rumor into documented history. The story of Franklin's lost expedition continued to captivate public imagination throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Books, lectures, and newspaper accounts chronicled the efforts to uncover the fate of the men and the mystery of the Northwest Passage. Franklin himself became a figure of almost mythic stature, the embodiment of exploration, courage, and leadership. His expedition, despite its tragic end, symbolized both the allure and danger of the Arctic, inspiring generations of explorers and scholars. Technological advancements in the 20th century renewed efforts to locate the ships themselves. Sonar mapping, underwater photography, and remote sensing allowed researchers to probe previously inaccessible areas. Expeditions mounted by Canadian and international teams combined historical research with these technologies, systematically scanning the waters south and west of King William Island. These missions were often hampered by shifting ice, extreme weather, and the logistical challenges of Arctic fieldwork. Still, persistence and patience gradually narrowed the search areas and refined understanding of where the ships had become icebound. The breakthrough came in 2014 when Parks Canada announced the discovery of HMS Erebus. Using historical records, Inuit testimony, and sonar mapping, researchers located the wreck lying largely intact on the seabed, south of King William Island. The discovery was a moment of triumph, offering direct physical evidence of the expedition's final resting place. Artifacts recovered from Erebus, from navigation tools to cooking implements, revealed details of life aboard the ship, its condition when trapped in ice, and the extraordinary challenges faced by the crew. 2 years later, in 2016, HMS Terror was located in Terror Bay, off the island's west coast. Like its sister ship, it was remarkably well preserved, a time capsule of mid-19th century naval engineering and Arctic exploration. Researchers noted the reinforcement of hulls, steam engine components, and preserved decks, providing unprecedented insight into the ingenuity and foresight of Franklin's preparations. The wrecks allowed for detailed archaeological study, revealing how men adapted to extreme cold, limited mobility, and prolonged isolation. They also provided tangible connections to the artifacts and skeletal remains discovered by earlier expeditions, completing much of the physical narrative of the voyage. The study of these wrecks continues today. High-resolution sonar mapping, underwater drones, and detailed archaeological surveys document the ships, structures, and contents with extraordinary precision. Items such as clothing, journals, tools, and personal belongings have been analyzed to understand daily life, rationing, navigation, and ship maintenance in the Arctic. These findings illuminate not only the technical aspects of survival, but also the social and psychological dynamics of the crew, highlighting moments of ingenuity, resilience, and human endurance. The integration of Inuit knowledge has been central to these discoveries. Oral histories preserved for generations provided clues that directed modern researchers to the locations of the wrecks. The collaboration between indigenous knowledge and modern science demonstrates the enduring importance of cultural memory in understanding historical events. Inuit accounts also emphasize the human dimension of the tragedy, describing men struggling across the ice, the signs of illness, and the evidence of extreme survival strategies. The legacy of Franklin's expedition extends beyond historical and archaeological discovery. It offers lessons in leadership, preparation, and the limits of human endurance. Franklin's meticulous planning, insistence on discipline, and commitment to documentation exemplify leadership under extreme circumstances. Yet the expedition also underscores the consequences of environmental misjudgment, limited knowledge, and the unpredictability of extreme conditions. Modern Arctic exploration, environmental research, and polar survival strategies continue to draw insights from Franklin's journey. Public fascination with the expedition remains strong. Documentaries, museum exhibitions, and scholarly research explore both the heroism and tragedy of Franklin's voyage. The story resonates because it combines adventure, scientific pursuit, human resilience, and mystery. Each artifact, journal entry, or skeletal remain offers a tangible connection to the men who faced one of the harshest environments on Earth, humanizing a historical event that might otherwise remain abstract. The Franklin expedition also reshaped the understanding of Arctic exploration. Its failures prompted improvements in ship design, nutrition, medical care, and navigation for subsequent expeditions. Lessons learned from Franklin's experience influenced future polar explorers, from 19th-century adventurers to modern scientific teams operating in Greenland, Antarctica, and the Canadian Arctic. The expedition thus serves as both a cautionary tale and a foundational story in the history of human interaction with extreme environments. As research continues, new findings emerge. Analysis of skeletal remains, isotopic studies of diet, and examination of personal effects provide insights into nutrition, health, and the final months of the crew. Scientific studies of ice formation, ocean currents, and climate patterns during the mid-19th century offer context for understanding the conditions the expedition faced. Each discovery enriches the narrative, connecting human endeavor to environmental forces in a complex interplay of survival, adaptation, and tragedy. The Arctic itself remains a central character in this story. Its beauty, isolation, and extremes shape every event: the entrapment of the ships, the overland march, and the decades-long search. Ice floes rise and fall, blizzards obscure vision, and the landscape both conceals and preserves history. The environment that challenged Franklin and his crew continues to command respect, demonstrating the enduring power of nature over human ambition. Ultimately, the discovery of HMS Erebus and Terror, combined with decades of research and Inuit testimony, has transformed a story once dominated by mystery into one of understanding, reflection, and reverence. Franklin's lost expedition is remembered not solely for its tragedy, but for the human qualities it revealed: courage, ingenuity, discipline, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. It is a narrative of endurance, exploration, and the profound interaction between human ambition and natural forces. The story of Franklin's lost expedition is more than a tale of ships frozen in Arctic ice or men succumbing to starvation and disease. It is a profound exploration of the human spirit, ambition, and the relentless desire to uncover the unknown. Franklin and his crew ventured into a world that was largely invisible to the civilized nations of the 19th century, a world where the rules of survival were dictated not by planning or courage alone, but by the unforgiving forces of nature. Even as the ice closed in around Erebus and Terror, and darkness stretched for weeks on end, the men maintained discipline, camaraderie, and an extraordinary commitment to knowledge. Their journals, logs, and meticulously recorded observations are a testament to intellect and perseverance. They observed weather patterns, charted coastlines, and cataloged wildlife, all while fighting exhaustion, hunger, and disease. In this context, every action, whether hunting a seal, repairing a sledge, or recording temperature readings, was an act of resistance against the immense power of the Arctic. The overland march, though marked by tragedy, also embodies the extremes of human endurance. Men faced conditions so severe that mere survival demanded ingenuity, resilience, and cooperation. Snowstorms obscured vision, frostbite claimed limbs, and hunger gnawed at both body and mind. Yet even in these desperate moments, evidence shows that the crew sought to preserve order, care for one another, and leave behind records for posterity. Every footprint in the snow, every improvised shelter, every note scribbled in a journal was an assertion of humanity against a vast, indifferent wilderness. Inuit knowledge proved critical both during and long after the expedition. Their oral histories preserved the memory of Franklin's men when written records could not. Inuit observations described weak, desperate figures struggling across ice floes, leaving behind evidence of their passage. These accounts, combined with modern archaeology, enabled researchers to piece together the final stages of the expedition, revealing routes, survival strategies, and the true scale of the human struggle. The collaboration between indigenous knowledge and contemporary science highlights a deeper truth. Understanding extreme environments often depends on listening to those who know them best. The rediscovery of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror in the 21st century brought a profound sense of closure. Sonar scans, underwater drones, and archaeological excavations revealed vessels remarkably preserved by the cold, low-oxygen waters. Artifacts, tools, clothing, journals, cooking implements provide an intimate glimpse into daily life aboard the ships. Structural analysis shows the foresight and ingenuity of Franklin's team. Reinforced hulls, steam engines, and carefully rationed supplies demonstrate a preparation that, under ordinary circumstances, might have ensured success. Yet the Arctic proved that even the most meticulous planning cannot always overcome nature's extremes. The human dimension of the story remains its most compelling aspect. Franklin, a commander of extraordinary discipline and foresight, led men whose courage, endurance, and resilience were tested to unimaginable limits. The crew's actions, maintaining routines, documenting their environment, caring for one another, reveal a profound commitment to order, knowledge, and humanity in the face of relentless adversity. Their story reminds us that exploration is not solely about discovery or conquest, but about the willingness to confront uncertainty, danger, and the limits of our own endurance. The expedition's legacy continues to inspire and teach. Lessons from Franklin's voyage have influenced polar exploration, ship design, nutrition, and survival strategies for generations. The meticulous records and artifacts left behind provide scholars with invaluable data about the Arctic environment, weather patterns, and 19th-century naval technology. More broadly, the story challenges us to consider the delicate balance between human ambition and environmental limits, the responsibility of leadership, and the profound costs and rewards of exploration. As the ice glitters under the Arctic sun and the wind sweeps across frozen channels, one cannot help but reflect on the courage of those who ventured into the unknown. Franklin's men remained present in the landscapes they traversed, the snow-covered islands, the ice-bound channels, the skeletal remains scattered across the terrain. Their journey, though tragic, is preserved in the very fabric of the Arctic. Every artifact recovered, every journal entry read, every Inuit story recounted keeps their memory alive. In the end, the lost expedition serves as both a cautionary tale and an enduring tribute. It is a reminder that human ambition, courage, and ingenuity can reach extraordinary heights, yet they are always bound by the forces of nature. It teaches that survival is as much a product of knowledge, preparation, and cooperation as it is of bravery. And it reminds us that even in the most desolate, frozen places, the traces of human endeavor endure, waiting to be discovered, remembered, and understood.